Welcome to the Say It Online podcast, where we help digital leaders build strong businesses and stronger communities by uniting the power of authentic marketing and simple, strong systems. If you're in need of better processes, trying to organize your small team, or just looking to learn from the real talk and failures of other leaders who have been there, you are in the right place. My name is Say Gabriel, and I'm here to help you stop running around stressed out, putting out fires all the time, and start actually living up to your full potential as a leader. Hey guys, and welcome to another solo episode of Say It Online. I'm super stoked to just kind of share a little bit of my thoughts and perspectives and experiences in this episode on the topic of strategic planning. More accurately, strategic planning when things are changing all the freaking time, just like, say in a pandemic. So we've been getting a lot of just attention around the stuff that we already put together in the past around strategic planning. And that really looked at how to establish cycles and habits and patterns that allow you to iterate on your ideas and goals so that you're consistently making progress towards them. Now, the difference between this and strategic planning in a pandemic is in a pandemic, it's really situational, right? Like situational in the sense that, yes, it's important to kind of have these like cycles and these kind of pre-scheduled moments where you're taking the time to kind of assess, set new goals, look at what's going on and kind of move forward from there. But in a pandemic or just in general, when there's a lot of change and you're in a state of transition, or the world or your industry is in a state of transition, it's important to move quickly, yes, and it's important to have these cycles in place, yes, but it's much more important to be able to focus and commit, and then also pause, reflect, and shift. I'm going to dig into a little bit more what this means here. So some of you guys know, probably most of you guys know if you've tuned into this before, that one of our main values at Anansi is failing fast. So the idea behind this is that we accept that failure is not the alternative to success. It is a necessary step on the path to success, an inevitable and necessary step on the path to true success and true growth, which is almost always iterative. Or it's by accident, in which case you can't replicate it, or it's challenging to harness it, etc. You'll run into those, but we're talking about systematic, intentional work here. So with this in mind, thinking about how to kind of be present and plan and shift in the moment. So the reason failing fast is such an important concept here is because failing fast means that you have embraced the idea that you're going to fail. And so you have decided that you're going to put yourself forward and let that happen kind of as quickly as possible in a safe way. And, that's important too. You don't want to just drive your business off a cliff taking unnecessary risks, but embrace the iteration. And the key thing here is that in order to fail fast, you need to take action. And this is a really, really critical point when you're in a state of transition or in a place in time right now where lots is kind of shifting or going on, or maybe you can't execute your strategic plan, but you don't want to commit to something totally new in case, things settle down and change, and then that is no longer viable, right? That's something else that comes out a lot. And the key here is to prepare without kind of over preparing. And that's where action comes in. So for example, at the beginning of the pandemic, we looked at kind of the people that we worked with and what state they were in and stuff. And we decided to make a decision to pivot to essentially a different segment of our audience that we perceived was less moved by the pandemic and taking advantage of the pandemic, in fact, to make kind of further investments and growth while things are kind of cheap and chaotic. And we immediately set up, some, customer development interviews, some ideas of how we could kind of shift our content and what these people would be interested in. Now, we started taking action on that immediately, but the fact is that as we went on, we actually started to realize that this wasn't working out. Right? And so the key here is not just to kind of like take action, throw yourself in, commit, and then kind of keep on that road no matter what. Keep taking action, taking action. No, it's to find this balance between kind of preparing and action. So we did some initial forays. We didn't just immediately pivot all of our offers and stuff. We tried to get in contact with some of these people who are already represented on our customer audience list, etc. We started to kind of refine our ideas. And what we found out is that this audience segment was really, really hard to pin down and hard for us to get in contact with. And really what they needed would have required a pretty large pivot from us in terms of our services. And we identified what that pivot was. But in the end, looking at it, we realized that the main issue that we've been trying to kind of resolve in looking at potentially pivoting was that our lead sources that had been consistent before the pandemic had essentially dried up, and so at that point, instead of throwing ourselves all into this new action, we took decisive action that was safe, that allowed us to see that whether that was the direction that we wanted to go in. And we decided, okay, you know what? It didn't really work for us. So we decided to shift again and focus on, okay, what sorts of new lead sources can we get? Again, action. And the first action quite often is gathering data, but you can't get too lost in that gathering data because once again, we started to see, okay, looking at one of the funnels we've been building around live training and all this other stuff. And through conversations, we started to find out that a lot of people over the course of those first few months of the pandemic had been so overloaded with information that, training courses and more info and guides and trainings were getting pretty overwhelming. But what we did find out is that people wanted to implement. They're feeling stressed. They're learning all this new stuff. Maybe they're having some opportunities. Maybe they're in a bad way and don't have as many resources as they might have to have someone implement for them. And, they don't have a lot of time. So now we could look at and say, okay, well, we're not going to be going out to any conferences or any of these other kind of typical lead sources. Online is flooded. Well, how can we give people what they need and what they're looking for and turn that problem that they're exhausted into the solution, into a win-win solution? Now, all of a sudden, we're producing micro trainings that are like 15 minutes most of the time, 30 minutes tops, that are focused on implementing and having implementation sessions as the follow-up. And again, totally sincere. Yes, is this like part of our funnel? And do we hope to partner with or engage or make sales with some of these people? Yes, absolutely. But by aligning it and kind of understanding this idea of the problem as the solution, we were able to actually really start to help people in a way that is kind of low pressure for them, low pressure for us, and again, start to kind of do that validation work. And, once we have those initial numbers, we can see that the conversion is there. This is stuff that people are interested in. The offer is there. It's aligned with where our existing audience is now, right? Because that's the other, if you're deciding to pivot, you have a few different options. You have totally different audience. You have same audience, like new problem or new solution for existing problem. I think those are kind of the top or biggest two, at least that we found to be the most successful. But of course, there's always more creative ways, like restructuring the way you solve the existing problem for the existing audience is another big one, right? Like for instance, going from being a done for you service to a consultancy, things like that. But the key thing is, once again here, when we have those initial numbers and we can look and make sure that everything was aligned, now we can look at and say, okay, we're ready to scale up. And we're protecting our resources by doing this, but we're also not being so self-protective and so risk averse or so cautious about taking action or so committed to one single path of action that we're not able to kind of be flexible and shift and grow as the situation continues to change. Because it's gonna, right? Even sometimes it extending just creates change, at least in terms of the pandemic, right? Like the pandemic itself has been similar in terms of what it looks like and what the risks are for months, over a year now. But in terms of what it means to us as businesses, as individuals, now that's context dependent, right? That's time dependent, that's area dependent, that's all sorts of other things. All right. So now that I've kind of given you this example, I just want to unpack it a little bit in terms of how we can harness or leverage this into a useful process or a useful approach for you guys instead of just kind of giving you stories, right? Stories are amazing, but I also like to interpret and kind of get some clarity and simplicity out of them. So whatever pulse you currently have for your strategic planning, or maybe you don't have a pulse for your strategic planning, right? We do small pulses weekly and a large kind of reset pulse, like our overall timelines, are quarterly. And there's lots of different resources, including the other podcast episode that we recorded to support you in this. We follow an EOS model. We've also been influenced by the 90-day year. There are several different models here that you can use. But in this case, this is going to be more problem dependent when you're strategic planning during the pandemic, right? Like you're still going to have those pulses and stuff. But what we found is it's really, really helpful to add in these extra kind of like checkpoints or pulses along the way. For example, we just started implementing a mid-quarter kind of check-in and realignment is because we found that allows us to just essentially check our expectations and what we're doing. Now, the other thing is when you're strategic planning, just in typical times, right? You're just looking to kind of grow your business or refine what you're doing in your business or, achieve some set of specific goals or determine what those specific goals could be. That was where we originally started. The iteration itself is where a lot of the strength is. So even if you're kind of struggling the first quarter, the second quarter, or the first week or second week that you're implementing these different pieces, the repetition and the length of time that it takes to kind of move between repetitions really serves in your favor. But in times like these, there's a much, much greater risk to waiting, to making mistakes, to all these other kind of different elements that can make us scared and sometimes paralyzed, right? That's why I keep reinforcing that action that is safe, but consistent, and a series of actions, like a serial approach, is really what I find works. But all the time, but especially in a pandemic, it's important to really hardcore focus. Because of this greater risk, it is so much more important to be willing to say no to things. So yes, we have our pulse, we have, our quarterly planning. And during that process, one of the strengths of this process is really about being able to focus. And it's so funny because simplicity and focus are such critically undervalued things. I have a degree in literature and English, stories and writing, and anyway, no surprise that this company and this job are my babies and work very well for me. And I swear to gosh, my entire undergrad, all we were learning to do was basically take a super, super vague topic and make it specific enough to be meaningful, essentially. And at the time, I almost thought it was arbitrary. I was like, wow, this requires a set of skills that's really good. It's hard. It did take me the 4 years to kind of master, but it seemed arbitrary. But now that I'm in the business world, I see, and in life, just how critical it is to be able to take something that's vague and make it focused and make it simple. And that doesn't require choosing something as it requires not choosing a lot of other things, or rather choosing to say no, more specifically, choosing to say no to a lot of other things. So here's what we found is that in these times, during the quarterly planning process, I really, really have to work extremely hard and double and triple check and check in with other people and have us all hold each other accountable to make sure that we're not taking on too much. Because the stresses of, the time and the pandemic and how it's impacting people and being in a state of transition and having been in this place for a long time, they take a toll on people. So everyone's capacity is reduced, even if it isn't in terms of actual hours, their mental and emotional and energetic capacity is reduced. And part of that is their ability to prioritize and make decisions in the moment, especially since every month feels like 3 months basically at this time, which is why I said, also increase the pulses and increase the check-ins. And what this does is it becomes very uncomfortable, because those constraints, right? Like when we're tired, we don't know what to do, being extra constrained, even though you would kind of think that it would make things easier because it just keeps things super, super, super simple and focused. At least for the overachievers on my team, maybe your company and the people in it are different. We always want to take on too much, basically, and it is difficult not to. So being willing to sit with that discomfort and being willing to commit and make sure everyone knows who's at that quarterly planning that you're going to be holding each other accountable to going painfully simple. It's going to be uncomfortable. This has been so critically valuable because, again, when you have that long timeline and that iterative process over time, then naturally you can kind of make these decisions on the spot, but there's also less change coming in, less things you have to kind of defend your time against, defend your energy against. The very kind of speed of intent and intensity of what's going on right now makes it so that pushing that discomfort and make sure that you're getting really, really, really clear in the moment and asking all the hard questions really alleviates that pressure throughout, right? Like we're agreeing and committing to be uncomfortable in this one specific time and space so that we will be more effective and more at ease, and our people will be more effective and more at ease, knowing what they have to say no to over the course of the quarter or whatever pulse or period that you've chosen. And that in itself is valuable, right? Because you're kind of crushing that discomfort into a safe space that you've already set aside that is separate from the day-to-day craziness, right? Because that's another important thing about strategic planning is make sure that you're doing the hard thinking work in a space, both literal and mental and emotional, that is removed and time-based, removed from your day-to-day life. Okay, so focus, kind of step one, focus. We've talked about that quite a bit, super critical. The next thing I really want to consider here is that you're going to have to protect and reaffirm that focus at those pulses, except when you're going to have to pivot on that focus at one of those pulses. And the nature of things is that, like I was taught by my mentor that within a quarter, you don't change your rock or kind of your key important but not urgent task or focus unless it's going to run your business off a cliff. And what we found is that during the quarter, during these times, we need to be really, really kind of, yes, defensive of that like goal and rock and energy and time, but we also need to be more open to it needing to change, right? And what we found is that to kind of save us from the knee-jerk desire to kind of like change every time something else changes, right? Which is problematic, which is why, my mentor and we have practiced that advice of kind of like sticking to your rock, is because it pushes you to make better rocks and better goals next quarter. But again, right now, risk is elevated. So building in and saying, okay, we're going to have this mid-quarter check, right? Or if you need to, this once a month check or something like that, where you're giving yourself permission to have that conversation and potentially pivot, but constraining yourself and constraining your team so that it does need to have that conversation and there is the push to stick with it, even if it's uncomfortable. This can be very, very uncomfortable. Like for us this quarter, this has looked like me originally, I was planning to spend this quarter working on polishing and launching a course. So after kind of some conversations and putting the work in and kind of seeing where it was at and realizing that my capacity was extremely limited, we sat down and essentially at the beginning of, or I think it was about midway through the quarter, no, sorry, I'm getting myself confused. So we sat down and decided at the end of last year that instead of doing this kind of pre-planned course, which has a much higher overhead and a much higher risk, that we were going to be focusing on a live version of the course where, I can just use my outline without having to produce all of the videos and all of that ahead of time, work with a smaller group of people and use that to refine, get more back and forth time, less prep, and then use that work to build on if it's successful and also to test the waters to see if we get the registrations to then put the production capital into the, self-directed course. So that's all really great. That's a pivot, right? But the fact is that this quarter and this time is the way it is. And it got to the point, midway through the quarter, this was the midway through the quarter point, where looking at kind of where we were at and some of the upheaval that was going on for some of my staff and needing to, bring people on and shift things around and all this kind of stuff, I looked at it and I was like, normally I would try to continue and do both. I would feel super, super uncomfortable with the idea of, we're in the middle of selling registrations. We have some people registered and actually just making the executive decision that we're going to pause. We're going to pause all of this. We are going to postpone this course. Yes, that's uncomfortable. Yes, that in itself has some, risks and drawbacks and stuff. But the reality is that I would not have been able to deliver the value that I needed to. And more importantly, I needed to work with, my salesperson on capacity and making sure that we can deliver the projects we're selling. And I needed to work with my CMO in terms of refining, validating, optimizing this funnel that we have that is bringing new people to us, right? And what that looked like was me basically admitting to myself, that's number 2, right? Is check in, be aware and check in with other people and see where your capacity and your team's capacity is at. All the shoulds in the world about capacity, I should be able to tackle this, I need this, etc. About people's literal amount of hours and energy available, including your own, is what I mean by that, not your capacity to deliver projects, as I was just referencing. Doing a lot of things in a crappy way is not going to get you anywhere. That's not what fail fast means. It doesn't mean do as many things as possible and understand that they'll be crappy. It means make consistent progress that is not perfect, but is continually iterating on itself. And for me, that meant acknowledging that all the work that we put into the launch of the course will now be there and ready to iterate on and do much, much better when we have that capacity. But also looking at all the kind of different things that I have and being like, okay, what is the linchpin here? Like, what is the critical thing that if I do not get done will impact everything else? And what is the critical thing that can solve as many different problems and move the business forward as much as possible? And when I looked at that actually was working in the CMO role and, working with my CMO, who, again, was in an area who was having lots of different things reduced in terms of capacity, and looking at it and being like, okay, how can we systematize this? How can we make it so that if we bring in a new person or split the role down into different pieces, where are we driving traffic? Who's overseeing this and that? And it seemed to almost come totally out of left field in some ways compared to all this stuff, which is like, ops and visionary and critical and the next big thing. But the reality is that when I looked at that thing as the linchpin and I looked at how much work it would really take, like what does success look like? And how much work would it really take to do that? I was like, well, if I'm doing all these other things at once, it's going to take a heck of a long time. But if I clear all those other things off and put them on pause and work with the people at hand and also make sure that we are all prioritizing together and saying no to all this other stuff, well, all of a sudden we're pooling our resources and we might be able to get it done in 2 weeks. And from there, let it work its magic, right? Let that work that you've done do its thing. And then I can move on to the next thing. And this kind of serial tasking where it's like, okay, this is the big focus and we're all going to work together on it and pound it out, get it out of the way, and then move on to the next thing. That is the most critical objective of strategic planning, especially in a time of transition and pandemic. That's the thing you need to remember is how are we continuing to make forward progress in such a way that we're doing it serially. So we're focusing on, okay, this is the most critical thing. These are the people that need to be involved. This is what success looks like at that kind of first stage. Cool. We're getting there. We're putting all our resources towards it. And then we're going to assess and reassess and move on to the next thing, whether it's the next phase of that thing, whether it's another slight pivot, whether it is as a leader with way too many things on my plate or things to do, the next kind of critical problem or not that needs to be solved in my business. And if I didn't stop to make these strategic decisions and look at everything, then I would just be pulled around by the most urgent thing, right? I would have been okay, urgent, need to crush this course and get that all prepped and out of the way. And okay, that's all out of the way. Now I'm going to look at this. Now I'm going to look at that. But diving from just urgent thing to urgent thing to urgent thing without looking at the whole list and kind of deciding intentionally how you're going to use your resources, of which you and your time and energy is usually the most valuable one, it's going to burn you out real fast, but it may not get you to where you need to go. And will there be some loss and some risk and stuff with kind of looking at it all at once, picking one, and then doing the uncomfortable thing of saying no and holding your team accountable to saying no to all this other stuff till it's done, and then reassessing? I mean, yeah, there's some potential risk, some potential loss there. But in terms of your energy, when you run out of energy, you're not going to be fearing that the thing left undone is the thing that's going to make or break your business. And you're not going to be missing that the thing that's left undone because you're now burnt out and can't think about it was the thing that would have made or broken your business. This is definitely an eating the frog thing, right? Like I said, it requires really that self-awareness, that being willing, that radical self-honesty, that radical honesty from the people around you, and an openness to have them reflect at you and point out the things that you can't see because you're in the middle of it. And that is kind of the critical thing here. Because if you know on some level that operations is your biggest issue and that you have a role that's going to sink you if it doesn't get filled, but you're running around to all these other urgent things because that one's the uncomfortable thing, well, it may be that you don't get around to looking at it until it's too late. And it may be that you then lose your business. And the risk has never been higher than now, basically, when things are so unsettled. And even though, some of us are lucky enough to have government supports and resources, but none of that will substitute for radical self-honesty and regular check-ins and pivots and pulses in terms of planning. And most importantly, focus, making a list, look at, intentionally choosing what to focus on next. And then again, cereal. The SERIAL cereal, not cereal like the one that you eat, but a series of things that follow each other, that follow a progressive and logical order. Anyway, I hope this was helpful for you. It's a little bit, as I said, of kind of like a ramble and a digging into my brain. But this has been so critical for us that I just really wanted to take the time to share. I'd love to hear if this is helpful for you, because this is really meaningful to me. It's hard. I'm not going to lie. It's hard. It's simple, but it's not easy. Just like the things that are worth doing. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed this solo episode. Let me know what you think of this. Leave a comment, etc. I'm curious if you have a different process for or different things that you've learned or problems or challenges about strategic planning, kind of in a pandemic or another transitional time. Let me know. Let us all know. We'd love to hear it. All right. Take care, guys. Now, if you got some value from today's episode, I would absolutely love it if you could just take 2 minutes and share the episode with another digital leader in your life who is looking to improve their systems or who needs to hear it. And whether you loved it or hated it, honestly, I would love to know. We would all love to know. It takes a whole team to produce this, and we love all of the feedback and insight that we can get. And of course, if you leave us an honest review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, that not only helps us improve, but also helps other people find us, which we really appreciate. Let's face it, the space is crowded. And if your agency systems need work or copy is still a huge pain in your agency's butt, well, we would love to help. We're currently offering free live micro trainings every Tuesday. And just for showing up, we'll also give you a free one-on-one half-hour coaching session to help you implement it. Sessions are only 15 minutes long. We keep the number of attendees pretty small at this point, and we really focus on practical advice instead of just rehashing that same high-level knowledge you already know, you learned in that course or on that Google search already. Anyway, check out the topic for our next session and register by heading over to sayitonlinepodcast.com/live. That's sayitonlinepodcast.com/live. Like I said, 15 minutes, not a huge commitment. Occasionally we do like a 30-minute one. We'd love to see you there. Take care.